once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there, continuing my trek, and when it comes to films, concluding my reviews of the time period that is known, mostly in retrospect, as the Disney Renaissance. This is the last film that officially goes under that. This is, of course, 1999's Tarzan. Like the previous few entries, I saw this in theaters. I enjoyed it. Had the VHS. And while it wasn't the last Disney film I saw in theaters, I mean, even when I was a youngin, that would probably go to either Monsters Inc. or I know it's a Pixar one, but bear with me, or Emperor's New Groove. I think it would depend on which one came out first. I think Monsters Inc. came out last. And after that, I didn't really see any of the Disney films in theaters until Bolt. That's right, I never saw Princess and the Frog in theaters. And technically, I still haven't seen it. Shh, don't hit me. And of course, there's been several others since then I've seen, but it's pick and choosy kind of. But this was a nice way to go out of when it comes to the Disney Renaissance, even though that's more based on what follows. Because what would follow, we continue to see a trend that we started to see already, and that is the box office numbers going down and the critics being a little bit more, well, lack of a better term, critical. Because this film didn't make money on its budget. I mean, $130 million budget made $448.2 million. But compared to earlier, you can kind of see the trend going down. Now, part of that is the fact that the budgets went up, even when not adjusted for inflation. You can see that they went up a bit compared to how they were 10 years prior with The Little Mermaid. But even it's one of those things that eventually you're going to start to run dry, especially since when you compare the 90s with the previous decades, they released a lot more films. Think about it. From 89 to 99, 10 theatrical films, and that doesn't even include the direct-to-video sequels that started, even though they really popped into higher gear around this time, a couple years after, actually. And of course, this is also when they were working with Pixar. We're getting all their films, all the TV projects made for TV films. So Disney was really saturating the market, which is interesting to say almost 30 years ago, when now with how many more companies they own, they're really saturating the market. But different thing. Now, this movie is I'm holding my phone in my hand for my notes in case anyone's wondering. It was directed by Kevin Lima, who also did a Goofy movie and would later do Enchanted, and Chris Buck, who would later do both Frozen films and Wish. So these guys have a Disney pedigree with them. And the screenplay, like a lot of previous ones, there's a lot of people involved, but the main people are Tab Murphy, Bob Zudicker, and Noni White, names which you've probably heard already. And it features the voice talents of Tony Goldwyn as Tarzan. He played Darren, the male road victim in Jason Lives. No one wants to die. And Colonel Bogley in The Last Samurai. A Minnie Driver, Jane Porter, needs no introduction. Legendary Glenn Close as Kala, Rosie O'Donnell as Turk, and Ryan Blessed as Clayton. You gotta love that booming voice. Okay. Like a lot of these films, even though he's gone by the time this film came out, this production starts with Jeffrey Katzenberg. He approached Lima when a Goofy movie was almost complete and offered him the film as a Disney TV animation project at a new studio. Of course, Lima was hesitant to have unexperienced animators handle the project. Not a worry that's unwarranted, by the way. And of course, once Katzenberg resigned, Michael Eisner offered it to him again, but upped the offers like, I see his TV feature and I would raise you a theatrical film. And Lima signed on, which I can see why, because even if it's considered the B project, like we talked about when we talked about Pocahontas and Lion King, you're going to have better animators working on it, more experienced animators that know what they're doing. And of course, in preparation, Lima read Tarzan of the Apes and visualized the theme of two hands held against each other, which big theme in the film. I was looking for something that would underscore Tarzan's sense of being alike, yet different from his ape family. The image of touching hands was first conceived as an idea for how Tarzan realizes he and Jane are
physically the same. And of course, that scene really does go with that. He approached Chris Buck, who was the supervising animator on
Pocahontas, and offered co-direction credit, and he accepted after hearing the
ideas. Of course, Tab Murphy, he loved the man versus nature theme and began a treatment in 1995. And for the third act,
Murphy suggested that Tarzan should leave for England, as he did in the book, but the directors felt that it was incompatible with their central theme of what defines a family.
In order to keep Tarzan in the jungle,
the third act needed to be reconstructed by redefining the role of villain and
inventing a way to endanger the gorillas. And of course, that's where Clayton
and his villain arc comes into play.
And of course, Clayton, he's a hunter character in the
vein of Gaston. He has little sprinklings of some of the arrogance from McLeach in
there, but of course done in the vein of a Victorian era person. I'd say gentleman,
but
even when he's not 100%
healed, where you can see the turn coming.
Or should I say reveal more than a turn? Gentleman is a term we'll use in the loosest sense, but Brian Blessed, I think, is what more conveys that than the writing, because Blessed's got that wonderful voice for it. In 1997,
Zudiker and White were hired to add humor and refocus the script's emotional weight, which, if there's
one thing this film does carry in spades, it is that emotional weight. One challenge the writers
faced was how Tarzan would learn about his past, and it was producer Bonnie Arnold who said when Kala takes Tarzan back to the treehouse, he was essentially telling him that he was adopted. This is necessitated
by him encountering humans and recognizing he is one of them. And of course, they brought on adopted
parents to
get their thoughts on that. Now, this is one of those things,
since it's
outside species adoption,
you would think you would realize that. But
as the film goes, you can see Tarzan,
he even questioned his stuff, like he yells at
his mother, like, why didn't you tell me there were strangers that look like me? So with that, he's still
thinking he might be some type of gorilla, just a hairless one.
Or he knows he's similar but different. It's one of those things that he knows that there's a difference, but he just doesn't have
the linguistic capacity to articulate it.
Or he just doesn't question it and all that because of how Kala loves him. And the way it comes off,
it's very tasteful, I will say.
It's one of those things to where
he doesn't hate his mother. And like there's
scene where he puts on the suit and he's like, they're hugging, and is like, no matter where I go, you're still my mother. That's a nice little moment. And I can definitely tell you, as someone who was raised by his grandparents, that scene did definitely hit me here, especially since all my grandparents are no longer with me now. Watching that, that's why I have a feeling I'm probably going to cry next time I watch
Coco.
I'm starting to feel a little bit. Now,
to create the sweeping 3D backgrounds in the film, Tarzan's production team developed a 3D painting and rendering technique
known as deep canvas, which is a term that was coined by artist-engineer Eric Daniels. And this technique allowed artists to produce
CGI backgrounds that look like a traditional painting.
And I have to say they did their
job pretty well, because even knowing that from my notes, looking at it, I'm like, wow, I can barely tell. It's not like with Beauty and the Beast years
earlier where you can tell
because the technology then was still new.
Here it's a little bit harder. I mean, there's
a couple shots where it's a little bit evident, but it's harder, so it shows that they're really doing their
job. And of course, I mentioned Brian Blessed. He's the one
that provided the Tarzan yell, because Tony Goldwyn could not make a convincing scream.
And Blessed went up to the producers
to tell him he could do it. And of course, they're
like, yeah, right. And then he yelled at them, and they accepted without hesitation. Which, considering how booming
Blessed's voice is, I was really not surprised that he was
able to do it. Well, I'm still on
the whole thing with casting. Randy Haycock, he served as a supervising animator for Clayton, and he based
his design on Clark Gable and other stars of the 30s and 40s, which is why he's got that
manly man visage to kind of contrast with Tarzan's more lean
wilderness vibe. And of course, kind of
adds to it when he does eventually
reveal his villainy to everybody, even though we, the audience, can telegraph it. But that's also because of how they animate Clayton. And a fun thing is that,
oh yeah, I forgot to mention this. Tantor, the elephant's voiced by Wayne Knight. Lance Hendrickson voices Kerchak. Nigel Hawthorne voices Professor Porter. I forgot to do that because I had these
notes arranged. Sorry about that. But the reason I do that now is that Tantor
was originally cast
with Woody Allen in the role. But of course, once Katzenberg left and went to DreamWorks, he convinced Allen to leave the project, and they went and did Ants. That's gonna be debatable whether that's a better choice, because I'm kind of hard to think of Allen in the role of Tonto with how the character's written. So the character probably is a little different. I could kind of see a little bit of it, just like the thing of like, you think this water's sanitary? I could see Woody Allen doing that in his voice. The stuff at the end is a little bit harder me seeing him, but I haven't really seen that many of Woody Allen's films where he's actually been in front of the camera. The main ones I've seen are like, I've seen bits and pieces of Annie Hall and of course Purple Rose of Cairo, but I believe he's more behind the camera for that film from what memory serves. And of course Ants, but that's an animated film, so I'm not really fully counting that. Going back down to the bottom part of my notes. And when they were seeing how Tarzan's body would move while sliding down a log, the animators based his movements on that of pro skateboarder Tony Hawk while on a skateboarder. And it was inspired by animator Glenn Keane's son's love of the sport, which that's something that they were really talking about when this film was coming out and showing all the making of stuff on Disney Channel. That's something I remember. And so going into the film in theaters, seeing that, I'm like, oh yeah, even though I'm not a pro skateboarder or even close to an amateur one myself, I know mainly just from playing Tony Hawk when I was a kid. And Minnie Driver, she largely ad-libbed the breathless speech in which Jane tells her father and Clayton about meeting Tarzan. And it took 7 weeks to animate 73 feet of film for it, which shows that ad-libbing in an animated film can be costly compared to a live-action one. But it definitely adds to the feeling of that, where she's trying to get everything out and her mind is just going in all different directions, so it really adds to the spontaneity of that moment. Another thing about Clayton is, according to the DVD commentary, his outfit was designed to appear like Sabor's yellow fur to designate him as the new villain. I never really caught on to that just consciously. I think that's more like the thing your subconscious notices and pegs him as the villain, but it's a nice little style thing for the animation, for the use of color. And of course, when he's introduced, he's covered in shadows that give him a look of spots. And now, this film is a musical, but unlike the previous musicals, which were straight musicals, or even Hercules, where it was mostly a straight musical, but then they introduced the whole thing of the muses doing the gospel, like singing in order to do an approximation of the Greek choir. Here, this is more a musical where the musical numbers are sung by a narrator. The only parts of it, there's only like a couple parts that are sung by the characters, but most of that was a stylistic choice while they were trying to figure out, like, how are we going to get this film to be a musical without it being, Part of that was to move away from the Disney show tune formula that this era had established. And of course, he was hired in '95, and this is what they had to say about it. I did not want Tarzan to sing. I just couldn't see this half-naked man sitting on a branch breaking out in song. I thought it'd be ridiculous. And how the final film is, it would be a little ridiculous. Maybe you like fine-tune the film, it'd be a little bit better, but with the final film, yeah. And I believe this is one of the films they haven't turned into a Broadway musical. Probably for that, but it could work. But it'd probably be one of those ones where only the narrator would sing again, but you'd have to do it right with a musical on stage. And of course, when they hired Collins, Son of Man, Trashing the Camp, and Strangers Like Me were based on his initial impressions of the script. And then, of course, and this is something that's really coming out now, a lot more people are talking about it, You'll Be in My Heart was written for his daughter. Which, of course, there's the whole thing about him being an absentee father that people are talking about now, and the fact that that his daughter named her daughter after the character Jane from this movie, so there's a lot of things there, but I'm not really going to go into it, but you can really feel the emotion resonate from both the lyrics and the music of You'll Be in My Heart. And I have to say, that's the one that, as I'm watching this, like I mentioned, I was thinking of my grandparents. That's a song that really got to me. And to add to this, Collins actually recorded versions of his songs in French, Italian, German, and Spanish, so he's really dedicated to it. Now, like I mentioned, the whole critical and financial thing, I already mentioned the financial aspect of it. Now for the critical. This is Rotten Tomatoes consensus of the film. Disney's Tarzan takes the well-known
Known story to a new level with spirited animation, a brisk pace, and some thrilling action set pieces.
Ebert gave it 4 stars. Another attempt by Disney to
Push the envelope of animation with scenes that move through space
with the freedom dreamed of in older animated films
and unattainable by any live action process.
At times I don't 100%
I agree with Ebert, as I made clear, but he's
pretty right in his analysis there. This is what Radio Times had to say about it.
This is one of the negative
ones I put here. Falls way short of Disney's
best output and featured weak comic relief.
And they concluded it lacked the epic sweep of Mulan or The Lion King,
and laced with
feeble background songs from Phil
Collins.
This King of the Swingers may be merchandise friendly, but it's no Jungle VIP. Nice little reference there to the Jungle Book. I have to very
disagree with
that. The only part that I will say is that it is not one of the best,
even from this era.
But then again, this era is so full of great films that it's only bad in comparison. Like, if there had only been like 2 or 3 other films in this decade, probably wouldn't be getting this. Now, when you compare it to like Mulan,
Hunchback, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast.
No, I'm right, yeah. But that's, like I said, in comparison. On its own, it's still a good
film. Weak comic relief. A little bit. I mean, it's not the best comic relief, but I would rank it above the gargoyles from Hunchback, as I mentioned. That was
one of my few little about that film. Watching it as an adult, I mean, Tantor is a pretty interesting comic relief. I mean, not the best, but not the worst. Of course, his cousin and all that. There, she's a fun little character. Roger O'Donnell does a good job of voicing. You know, a lot of the physical comedy aspect of Tarzan when he's younger,
trying to adapt to living with the gorillas.
It's fun, like when he first practices throwing his spear during the Son of Man montage,
and he gets all the fruit, and then it lands above Kerchak, and there's all that fruit all over his face. That's a nice little comedy
thing. And it's more like a dramatic
comedy scene, but like the stampede with the
elephants. That's a fun little moment. And of course, the misunderstanding before that. There are no piranhas in Africa.
Yeah, they all are there in South America. Piranha. Which is kind of funny that they do a joke like that when you learn about
what type of fish live in the fresh waters of Africa.
There are ones that are probably worse than piranhas there. Like live tigerfish, for example.
Poor elephants. And now I'm almost 20 minutes
into this video, and I've gone through all my notes, and I haven't even talked about the plot of the film.
Just about everyone knows a little bit about what the story of Tarzan is. He's a man that was raised by apes in the deepest, darkest jungles of Africa. And of course, when he's
an adult, he comes in contact with humans
from England, where he was originally from, where he's of noble blood. And they're trying to civilize him. And that film does
cover that basic notes. Now, beginning of the film, we see his parents escape a burning
ship. They land on shore.
And they build a home for themselves. And it's contrasted with the gorillas living
in the wild. Now, Kerchak and Kala's son
is killed by Sabor, the leopard.
And then off screen in turn, he kills Tarzan's parents. From what I understand,
this scene was originally supposed to be
shown, but I think it works stronger if we only see the aftermath and we see like the gun somewhere, we see the house messed up, and we think of it, the whole theater of the mind.
It could have worked, like even if you only showed the beginning
and then hinted at it, but I think not showing it makes it stronger. Because then you also wonder, like...
Then how did Sabor miss Tarzan?
Anyway, Kala saves Tarzan from Sabor, adopts him.
Even though Kerchak is like, yeah,
I don't know about this. And he agrees to let him stay. And of course, this is where part of that whole central
aspect of family comes in with it. Because
Kerchak is a main person who does not accept Tarzan. At first, it's only
Kala and Tarzan's cousin and maybe a couple of the other gorillas. But by the end, everyone does. But Kerchak is the one outlier. And the line that really sells it is
what he says at the beginning. I said he could stay. That doesn't make him my son. And his actions throughout the film really show that he just views Tarzan as a hanger-on. That is until we get to a scene involving Sabor. But a lot of this shows up even when he's a kid, where he's all like, he's just another nuisance. Tarzan trying to really fit in because he doesn't fit in, like with the scene where he's covering himself in mud. That right there
really says a lot.
And I think part of
that ties into the whole adoption theme that the film is going with.
If I were to,
approximate it in a human term,
it would be like a couple,
of one ethnicity adopting a child of another one, and they live in an area where
their ethnicity is predominant. Let's say a black couple adopting a
white child or vice versa, and
the neighborhood they live in is predominantly the ethnicity that doesn't belong to the child. Or
that's a child of mixed ethnicity.
city parentage in an area where that's not common. That's the best approximation for it with what Tarzan is doing. Because adoption, just
Normal adoption, you can apply it with that, and nothing really
goes with it. But the way he's really doing it, like, you can really see, like, he does not like being mostly furless compared to the gorillas. And it's really working on him. Now, the scene with Kala talking with him
really does hit the heartstrings, and it
goes into the montage where it
goes to him being an adult.
And the scene I mentioned about Kerchak coming to terms with Tarzan, there's two moments with it. The first
First one is after Tarzan kills Sabor and inadvertently,
he is avenging his biological parents, and
technically his adoptive sibling, because
technically the baby that's killed at the beginning is technically his adopted sibling, even though they never met each other because of the whole timeline thing. And Kerchak finally does come to terms with Tarzan being a part of the family. He doesn't admit he's his son yet. That comes later. As this is going on, this is where the humans
come in. Clayton, he's the new villain.
and then, of course, Jane and her father, Professor Porter. Tarzan saves
Jane from a bunch of I think it's supposed to be
baboons that are chasing her. It's a nice little comic relief moment. Put me down, put me down, put me down.
Pick me up, pick me up, pick me up.
And, of course, their whole little
interaction, with the whole hand moment. And then the whole montage where Tarzan is learning from them. He's learning what a human is.
And eventually Tarzan
does take them to go see the gorillas.
But this is more Clayton's prodding, because whereas Jane and her
father see looking at the gorillas as a good educational moment, because think about it, this is a time period where gorillas, there's not a lot known about them other than the fact they were primates. Because remember, there was a time period where gorillas were seen as a cryptid.
And they're like, oh, people
will look at him and go, yeah, oh yeah, big hairy man living in the jungle. What have you been eating? What have you been chewing on? What have you been drinking? And of course,
find out, oh my God, there are gorillas. And of course, they are named after the, I think it was from Greek myth, tribe of
hairy women, if I remember right.
I think it's Greek mythology. It could be misremembering it, but I know it's from one of the mythologies
of that time period.
Now, they are really interested in learning more about him, whereas Clayton,
he just sees it as an opportunity to make money,
mainly by capturing
a bunch of them from the the troop and taking them back to England.
Which, of course, is his whole plan. Of course,
he does a mutiny and
goes to capture a bunch of them, which leads to Tarzan and everyone breaking out and saving the troop. But of course, I mean, as a minor spoiler, but Kerchak ends up dying because Clayton
shoots him.
But this moment is what leads to Kerchak realizing how much he really did care for Tarzan, and Tarzan was a very important member of the family. And before he passes, he refers to
Tarzan as his son.
Hearing that moment, I'm like, oh
my God, this moment's more emotional than I remember it.
And part of that is Lance
Henderson's performance.
His vocal performance in this film is excellent. I mean, there's not a dud in the
main cast, I would say. Even if you don't like the comic relief or whatnot, you gotta admit the performances
at least are good. And of course, Tarzan and Clayton, their little final fight up
in the treetop, kind of mirrors a little bit of the fight between Tarzan and Sabor, so really fitting that Clayton is
the replacement Sabor for the ending part of the film. But also a little bit of the contrast of the modern world versus the more, for lack of a better term, primitive world of nature. And one moment that I really do like in it is at one point, Clayton loses a grip on his gun, and Tarzan gets a hold of it. There's that moment, like, is he gonna use it? Is he gonna give in to his baser instinct when it comes to the modern world? Nope.
Tarzan does not give in. He does not shoot Clayton.
And of course, in the whole scuffle,
Clayton gets a bunch of vines around his neck, and this
leads to probably one of the darker
deaths for Disney villains. And of course, it goes into
the cliche of a Disney villain dying by falling. I mean, it's a different take on it, because most of the time when a Disney villain dies by falling, it's usually
off the edge of a building, off the edge of a cliff.
You know, Gaston fell off the
castle. Ratigan fell off a Big Ben.
I'm trying to think of... I mean, every now and then they'll mix it up. I mean, even the first one, there's a little bit of that asterisk, because she fell and then the boulder
fell on her. Here, though, Clayton essentially hangs himself because of those vines and him with his machete.
Now,
they lessen the darkness a little bit by having Tarzan try to stop Clayton from doing it. Clayton doesn't listen to him.
But just the way the scene is, where he finally gets the right one and it goes down and then
it goes taunt. It's like, ooh.
But Clayton, he brought it upon himself, and he basically deserved it. It was fitting end for him, considering all he'd done throughout the film. And it looks like there's going to be a parting, but the
film doesn't have a happy ending because Jane and her father do stay.
Because Jane realizes she loves Tarzan, and they're essentially together. And of course, there's all the spin-off shows and the movie and all that. So their story does continue in one form or another. It's a happy ending for all involved. And like I said, if there's any weak
point here, it's probably a little bit of the comic relief, but it doesn't annoy me as much.
I mean, it is different because of the way the musical stuff is handled, but with how the final
film is constructed, it fits.
Now, the musical
numbers is the only time we have anything resembling a
narration, so there's that. The relationship things, mother, son, greater family, and then of course, I guess you could say with Jane and her father, kind of a little bit unfound family, but that
kind of goes more
into in-laws once Jane and Tarzan fall in love. That is the emotional heart of the film. And then there's a little bit of that modern world versus
natural world thing when it comes to Clayton versus Tarzan.
But I think that's more
of Tarzan accepting that he is a human.
But he is not like men like Clayton. He can accept that he's a human without accepting some of the more darker tendencies that have come out of humans because of them living in a quote-unquote modern society. And that's really all there is to say
about the film. I mean, it definitely comes with my recommendation, but
basically every film in the Disney Renaissance has my recommendation with it. Where would I rank it?
Why would I spoil that? Because even though this is the last film in the Disney Renaissance, I still have one more video planned, and that is
next week's video, and that will be me ranking all the films
of the Disney
Renaissance. But until then.